Welcome, everyone. Can you hear me? Um, Many of you may have heard of basic income. It's an idea that I only heard about 10 or 20 years ago, but it has been around for a long time. And I think as more people talk about basic income, I think it's important to understand the different terms, the different models, and what they mean so that you can make sense out of those articles. So I'm going to try to quickly go through that history. Actually, it pretty much has started with Tom Paine back in the late 1700s. He came over from England. Um, Quite a biography here, and he he was pretty much of a derelict when he came over to Philadelphia. He drank a lot. He kind of found his bearing when he started writing and having an audience. And he saw the common spaces in this country well, where he saw, in a sense of leveling of property, where that basically England and the New World were very based in property rights. And he saw property rights as the roots of inevitable poverty. He witnessed a slave auction and was horrified at watching the Africans being brought before the auction, being stripped down and sold like livestock. And he watched the commons as a force of leveling of where anybody could bring their livestock to be pastured. He may have had some experience with what the native people here were doing and how they looked at property rights. But in any event, private property was what he saw as the challenge. So he proposed to abolish poverty by coming up with a plan that would create a national fund that would give a one-time payment to anybody at age 21, and then annual payments of a fairly small but reasonable, what he thought is reasonable amount on a once a year basis after age 50. That got a dialogue going, and Thomas Spence countered his idea 1 year later, out of concern that it wasn't generous enough. It was not going to get rid of poverty. And so Spence's distribution, he was concerned that the elderly were the only ones who got a regular income. Children got nothing, and adults only got a one-time payment that he thought would be quickly used up. So he advocated for his position because it would go to anyone, whether male or female, married or single, legitimate or illegitimate, from a day old to the extremist age, making no difference between the families of rich farmers and merchants. Jumping ahead to 1962, Milton Friedman proposed a negative income tax. And his negative income tax is based on an income baseline. Now, the way our taxes operate now, if your income is below that baseline, you don't pay any taxes. And the way it works today, many people simply don't file income tax returns if their income is below the baseline. Milton Friedman is suggesting that while the blue markers in this chart are trying to lay out the principles of a progressive tax, where the more you earn, the more you pay in taxes. He would set think of it either as a poverty rate or a legitimate baseline of what people should have as an income floor. And if you're below that baseline, you would get a negative income tax or kind of refund or rebate based on that. So the red marks here would show what people would get under his negative income tax. Then in the late 60s, after we'd had public assistance going for a while, Richard Nixon proposed a family assistance plan that would have provided the families of unemployed people to get basic income. Let's see, where am I looking? This was this was following Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty, and so basic, which was trying to raise people out of poverty, and so Nixon was encouraging people to work because the public assistance scale had been raising poor people's ability to manage by supplementing their cash assistance with also food stamps and medical help and sometimes subsidized housing, whereas there were a lot of people who didn't qualify for public assistance, who were in low working jobs, who could not get, say, health insurance, because the only way, if you were not poor, if you were not on assistance, health insurance was only available through employers. So people working in their garage were not getting medical coverage, they were not getting housing subsidies, and there was resentment building up. So Richard Nixon thought that his family assistance plan would help remedy that problem, recognizing that it has no less of an obligation to the working poor than to the non-working poor. And he wanted to scale the programs in ways so that it would always pay to work. And his plan did not pass in Congress. And for reasons that I think that are interesting to share, because you may recognize these. His assistance plan would only cover families with children, and it had a sort of a work requirement. So interest groups related to the existing welfare program saw it as a threat to their operations. Conservatives worried that the family assistance plan would be too expensive and that it would encourage dependency. And liberals complained that it was too stringent and not generous enough. So it did not pass. Looking to our north, to Canada, to Manitoba in particular, and Canada and the United States have often shared with one another and kind of followed along similar trails, but not exactly the same. In 1970, Canada was able to adopt universal health care. And so they thought that the next step toward a more fair and equal society was to set up a basic income. They set up the first saturation site experiment outside of Winnipeg in the town of Dauphin, Manitoba. And where they established a floor, thinking that they thought would be an amount sufficient to live a modest but dignified life in this largely Ukrainian prairie farm community. This was supposed to last for quite a long time. It lasted for 4 years and was recognized and has been dubbed the town without poverty for those 4 years. These are some pictures from Dauphin of Ukrainian church, Ukrainian decorations in their town hall and their railroad station, which was quite a feature. So they were quite a promising town as with the railroad going through it. What am I forgetting here? I'm losing my track here. Okay. Anyway, I'm skipping a page. Here we go. Basically, in Dauphin, anybody whose income dropped, this program set an income floor in a different way, a little bit more like our assistance programs in that it was available to everybody, but the money only got paid out to families whose income fell below a certain, shall we say, poverty level. So it was available as a stopgap for any family that was facing struggles. Being a farm community, that might mean that the prices were too low for them to make ends meet. It might mean that crops failed, jobs changed, lives changed. And so this was available to everybody. What they found in the data was that at any given time, no more than about a third of the population was actually getting the money, but yet it was still a town without poverty, and they still had the security that these funds were available to them if they needed it. This program ended early for a variety of reasons. It was looked at, it was studied later on. Ended for a variety of reasons. One is that it ran out of money. Inflation rose, interest rates went up. The program was set up so that all the recipients would get a cost of living adjustment. So they needed more money as inflation went up. More people were looking for the money because unemployment was rising under the economic difficulties of the time, and yet there was nothing in the budget for those increases. So their staffing, their oversight, their administration, they ran out of money. This program included disabled people. It included people who were institutionalized. It included retired people. It did not include people who moved in or moved out during this period. Moving on only a little bit later, well, looking at the taxes in the United States, our own taxes were increased after the World War, or no, we went through the Great Depression, And then one of the ways out of the Great Depression was to raise the top marginal tax rate. FDR bumped it up to 94%. Nixon brought it down to 70%. Reagan in 1980 lowered it to 28%. And it has pretty much stayed between 28 and 40% ever since, which means that at this point, any joint filers with incomes above about $750,000 are paying no more than 40% for their top dollars, whether they're millionaires or billionaires. There is no marginal tax rate above that. And that makes a difference in the amount of tax revenues we have available. And I don't have the time. Okay.
You know, Sue, Claudia is not here yet, so you may just.
Well, and I don't, and I.
Oh,
okay.
Excellent.
Okay, good.
All right.
Well,
we'll give Sue till 10 after. Yeah.
So the only absolute, the only saturation site experiment we have in this country is in Alaska, where Alaska found that they had substantial revenues from oil and mining, and back in 1982 they opted to create a permanent fund dividend, which shared those profits with the residents of Alaska. And over the years, that started off at $1,000 issued out once a year to residents of Alaska. And over time, it has expanded. So in 2024, the Alaska Permanent Fund dividend was a little bit over $1,700 per resident. Then in 2020, Andrew Yang brought basic income to the awareness of most Americans when he campaigned for president, offering a basic income of $1,000 to each of us. He said, the most direct and concrete way for the government to improve your life is to send you a check for $1,000 every month and let you spend it in whatever manner will benefit you the most. The government is not capable of a lot of things, but it is capable of sending large numbers of checks to large numbers of people promptly and reliably. We have plenty of resources. They're just not being distributed to enough people right now. His goals were to end poverty, to prevent disruption from automation and technology that would interfere with people's work. He wanted to shift the economy from a profit economy to from a profit-based capitalism to a human capitalism, and give people the freedom to switch jobs, to move, to innovate, and to contribute to society in the best way they could. And his model has continued to carry, in many ways, has continued to carry the model, be the model that most of our basic income experiments have followed. Just the woman who who uncovered the data from Dauphin has written a new book updating that information since the COVID pandemic, because she found out how very quickly Canada was able to make resources available to people in an emergency. The basic income experiments in the United States have generally been more of the Yang model, where they pick out a population that is their target population and issue typically $500 a month or $1,000 a month to people in a sample of that population, and simply leave it at that amount regardless. They're not looking at an income floor. They're looking at a flat $500 or $1,000 a month for the duration of the experiment. And that's been the pattern almost universally in the United States. California has had a variety of experiments. Many of them were families with children. They also did basic income experiments focusing on undocumented workers, undocumented people, also formerly incarcerated people. They've also issued basic income plans with foster care youth and with artists. And then Minnesota has had a variety of basic income experiments, mostly all in the Twin Cities. Some of them helped low-income people develop a college fund for their children. And then they expanded that to a more traditional monthly basic income program. All gave a basic income support during the pandemic to artists. And Minneapolis is conducting a basic income experiment to people in certain zip codes. So there are pilot projects in a variety of different states all over the country. And our own Mayor Carter is one of the leaders of that. Let's see, which way have I gone here? He is one of the leaders in the Mayors for Guaranteed Income, which is a public site that has maps. They solicit membership from mayors and county officials all over the country. They have a map so that you can look in whatever part of the country you want and see who in that region has signed on with Mayors for Guaranteed Income. They share stories of the programs in different places and news stories that have been published. As you go into the different projects, you can see wonderful stories. I would love to be able to share some of the stories from people who have benefited from these programs, but in the interest of time, I have squeezed that out. Common conclusions of basic income is that people experience more autonomy and respect. Their financial resilience improves. People pay down their debt. Housing conditions improve. Families invest in education. They support their children in education, and they also may find themselves going back to school to get more education for themselves. Physical and mental health improve in most all of these experiments. Most people working continue to work. Going back to Dauphin, it was very clear there that the only people who reduced hours were, this is back in the 70s, were mothers who reduced hours so that they could do more caregiving of either children or parents or whatever. I also found that young men who were dropping out of high school to go to work on the farm and help out their families were, during the Mincome experiment, actually their families could afford to have them stay in school and finish and get their diploma. One of the years in Dauphin, the graduation rate was actually greater than 100% because some of the people who had dropped out of school, because of the security of having the basic income as a fallback, they actually went back to high school and got their diploma, bringing the graduation rate up to more than 100% for that year. So education is certainly one of the things that continues to be a draw. And people in toxic situations are empowered to make changes in their lives. Basic income gives more people more options in work and caregiving in other areas of their lives. They find they have more social trust, and along with that, they find ways to do more to contribute in their communities. I need to end this soon. Well, but with where would funding come from? Most of the saturation sites, the funding is coming from federal and state programs, federal and state funding. Um, Thinking of Alaska and Dauphin primarily. Yang's Andrew Yang was promoting a value-added tax that would fund the bulk of his dividend. Others talk about the power of a wealth tax in being able to fund basic income, which actually, in a sense, goes back to Tom Paine's idea of looking at it as a way of redistributing wealth from those from rich people with plenty of private property to those who are in need, and equalizing the wealth and eliminating poverty. So the wealth tax would make sense throughout this idea. Negative income tax by Milton Friedman is still being talked about and considered. Um, our earned income tax credit that is currently in effect is a step toward a basic income. While it's limited to families with children and families who have low income, we're now seeing some experience with making it available on a monthly basis rather than just as an annual refund for tax returns. But most of the basic income experiments in this country have been funded by foundations. They have been supporting the opportunity to try these out. Other sources of income, there would be increased tax revenue from improved productivity as more people find their way out of poverty and into better working conditions. There would be a variety of savings. People would be moving away from traditional cash assistance with under basic income and reduced cost of food and other assistance, all of which would reduce the cost of the oversight and the bureaucracy that we currently have, that those current welfare programs are built around. I could talk a long time around that since I used to work in that system. But I'll just say the cut and the reduced cost of overhead would be huge. There would be a savings from lower costs in public safety as more people find themselves having hope and opportunities, and certainly savings in the costs of health care as people's mental and physical health improves.
Beautiful.
And here I am.
Thank you so much, Sue. This is a fascinating topic, and I am guessing there are several questions. This is so well researched. I want to offer up that Sue has agreed to make herself available once we're all done here, if you want to follow up with some questions as well, because we still have an exciting presentation by Claudia Fate, who is going to be introducing her new book, which is going to be for sale today as well. But I'd like to give at least time for one or two questions, and then we can kind of go from there. And the honorary first question goes to Mr. Will Munger.
I always love to harass Sue. So I was just thinking here, with the current national debt that we have, is it realistic to think that we can fund something like this? Also, there's a need for healthcare for people. Universal healthcare would be a priority for me. And putting more money into Social Security so we don't lose that, and all kinds of other things. It's realistic to think that we can introduce a negative or an income tax or a in, regular income to people.
Um, Back when I first offered to do this forum, I was imagining that this was something that was 10 years down the road, that there were going to be a lot of experiments to come. And right now, they're all based in the Twin Cities. I would love to see a basic income experiment in northern Minnesota in this region. And I wanted to share this information so that we can encourage and think about how we might want to bring basic income to our area. I have been told that there is an income experiment being worked on up in Bois Forte Reservation focusing on youth. I have not been able to confirm that, but certainly this is a time when we could continue doing experiments. Now, my thinking changed once we had Kamala Harris and Tim Walz on the ticket for president. And it occurred to me at that time that if they were elected, basic income might come to Minnesota before we even knew what it was. Because Tim Walz is very aware of basic income as a possibility. He's very close, and in fact, for the last 2 years, there has been legislation in our Minnesota legislature about to create grants they were ready to build up $100 million in this legislation for grants for different parts of Minnesota to develop basic income projects within Minnesota. And so if they had gone into the White House, movement toward basic income could have gone very, very quickly. So I was very anxious to bring this information to our area so that we can continue to follow it. Now, the election did not go the way I wanted it to. So now we may be back at the 10-year plan.
Yeah, it's a shame. I would love to pass the mic to Scott for one more quick question, and then I'm going to introduce Claudia Faith as our next speaker. But here we go.
So I'm very concerned that we can hardly afford not to have a guaranteed basic income. The carjackings, the crime, the poverty, what could happen is frightening. If people are too desperate, we can take it from prison budgets, we can take it from military budgets. There's just a lot of ways that we need to look at. I hate to see a lot of carjackings happen where people are losing their cars until we finally realize people are desperate. They need to have a to live on.
Thank you, Scott. I will just close by saying if anyone wants to be part of the local conversation about how we want to explore the possibility of basic income in our region, please get in touch with me.
I'm going to plead to squeeze the time and say it's the parties who game the system that get in the way of good ideas. And scale is also a matter. How well you do in communities versus trying to nationalize something. What I would invite us all to do is look at the way the economy functioned in the family farm era and how the Department of Agriculture has provided what are generally called subsidies, but they're really base economics for the economy back in the day. There's so many ways for us try to look at this in ways that accept that not everybody's well-intentioned.
Thank you for those closing words from our audience here. Thank you, Giger, and thank you everyone for being here, and especially to Sue for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. I'm gonna do the hip. Yeah, just really appreciate the conversation. We take it forward and be ready when we're ready.